The great outdoors, out-of-home advertising, it has taken a bit of a step back during the lockdowns over the pandemic. It was something that was gaining some traction and stopped in its tracks, basically. But now we are seeing how responsive it is, how agile it is, and what it really offers to marketers, to buyers, and planners. So thank you for joining us for this discussion. First off, I'm going to get my panel to introduce themselves, starting with you, Nigel.
Nigel Clarkson, I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Hivestack. Hivestack is a full-stack platform that specializes in programmatic digital out-of-home. So we have demand-side platform that helps agencies to plan and buy outdoor, and we have an SSP that helps media owners to monetize their digital inventory with out-of-home.
So Chair here. So I'm the head of performance media from Reprise Digital, which is the world's largest, one of the world's largest performance marketing agency under the IPG family. So in case you're wondering what a performance person is doing here, basically Reprise thinks about performance marketing really differently. Instead of just focusing on particular channels or paper outcomes or bottom funnel, we think about the entire flow in terms of how we can basically help move customers along the entire purchase path.
And I'm Penelope. I'm with R3, a principal media consultant. And really, I think just to answer the quick question, the 3 R's are return on media, return on agencies, and return on investment. So that's pretty much what we do.
Thank you very much for joining me. I'm going to keep it quite general with the first question. Out of home, the marriage of programmatic and out of home, what is it all about? Nigel, can you get us started with that?
In 2 minutes, describe your job. Can I have a very quick show of hands? If anyone in the room, I know ATS is like heavily online and mobile. Does anybody do programmatic out of home or has been involved in programmatic out of home in any way? Okay, a few, about a quarter. Okay, so we know what programmatic is. Programmatic is the use of data to inform and educate decisioning in real time for advertising environments, specifically online and mobile. And out of home is an amazing broadcast channel. And what programmatic technology does in out of home is marries those two principles together, where we take the very best of programmatic experience, which is around data and decisioning and real-time delivery and activation, and the best of out of home. So we use, I think the big difference with programmatic out of home, it is a one-to-many channel. Online and mobile is a one-to-one. It's from a computer to a device. And obviously, a device in out-of-home's case is a digital billboard, and we were talking earlier about the digital billboard that greets you in passport control in Singapore, where there were 300 people in a queue. So one play on that screen equals 300 impressions. And the very principle of programmatic out-of-home is that it understands through an impression multiplier how many device IDs, a device ID being a proxy for people, are in front of a screen at one time. So it basically means that you can activate more effectively your digital out-of-home.
Nice.
Okay, did I pass?
I think that wraps it up, to be honest. Thank you all very much for joining us. I'm joking. So, Chair, in terms of the importance of digital out-of-home for your role, what does it mean to you?
So at present, I would say not quite. And actually, over the past couple of months, I think from my perspective, clients have been, I'm actually quite surprised by the show of hands here. From my perspective, actually, that it's been quite slow to adopt. I think many people are still more familiar with how they approach activation through traditional out-of-home. In fact, I still feel like there's a lot of education piece around with clients in terms of moving them into this particular space, even though it might seem very intuitive to a lot of digital marketers within this field. From a client adoption standpoint, and as I found out from Nigel as well, I think in fact supply is actually overriding demand within this region.
And Penelope, in terms of the education piece, I suppose that's a lot of what you bring to that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we are finding most, and in the conversations also that we have been having kind of just ahead of this, has been really about explaining what does digital out of home mean and what does it really mean to programmatic. Is it complementary? I think, and also how do you address the one-to-many versus the one-to-one? I think there's a lot of skepticism. So a lot of the education, a lot of the questions that we're finding are, is that really the reach that I'm going to get? Is that really the audience I'm going to get? So I think a lot of what I think we would like to talk more about, and we want to have this panel and this good discussion about that, is being able to understand that this is an audience that you can reach and how you can reach them, and of course like why you would even want to reach them as part of kind of the overall consumer journey that your brand is trying to achieve, or if you're an agency working with partners and trying to achieve on behalf of your brands.
Yeah, I think it's an evolutionary piece, because out of home has traditionally been the most old-fashioned way of planning and buying outdoor. You tend to pick a list of sites or screens and you go, I'll have that one, there's a price, and you own it for 2 weeks. And then digital screens came along, and they're like, hey, I can have 6 different ads in that screen, and they just scroll around. It's called the loop. So most digital out-of-home inventory sits on a 1-minute loop with 6 advertisers having a 10-second spot each. Now, that's been happening for 20 years. These screens cost $250,000 to build. They are super connected via 5G. You can get an ad onto a screen in a nanosecond, and yet we're still selling 6 ads scrolling around in a loop. Nobody would invent digital out of home to be how it is now if they started. So, we're part of the education piece, and education is massive, probably the biggest part of my job, teaching programmatic people that programmatic out of home is not the same as programmatic online, and teaching out of home people that the robots are not here to kill their business. And those 2 parts are really important. So when we've been hiring a team around the region, we look for people that have either programmatic or outdoor, because there's very few that have both. And that's the same situation in agencies. There is we talked about this earlier, didn't we? There's a challenge of ownership. Like, who actually owns this space in an agency? Is it the programmatic trading desk that don't understand outdoor? Is it the omni-channels who are new to this space? Or is it the people that always bought outdoor learning to do it in a new way? I don't have the answer, but I know that currently most of the money coming into digital out of home across the world is from people who always bought outdoor, but increasingly the omni-channels and digital agencies are starting to get involved, because it's a new way to target people on screens out of the home.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose carrying on with that in terms of the omni-channel piece, and particularly how that's working in APAC, in this region, how are you seeing marketers bring that into part of their omni-channel strategy, and how are you advising on that, Penelope?
I think there's a desire. There is a definite desire to actually incorporate it into an omni-channel piece. But I think what we're also working with in kind of the region is a very fragmented landscape. It is not just fragmented, across languages, but the outdoor inventory is fragmented. And so there is lots of pockets of, how am I reaching them? And there's no one standard. So one of the first things I think that we have started, and as we work with clients and talk about how they can incorporate it, not in a multi-channel approach, but in a true omni-channel approach, where the consumer really is at the center of this. And I'm targeting, an audience, this old-fashioned idea of an actual, you have a target audience that you're trying to reach. And how are you actually reaching these people across these, the different inventory lines, across different supplies, across different, geographies? And one of the things that we don't even have in this region is a standardized form of measurement. So every market has its own source of measurement. Even within a market, even as small as Singapore, you're finding that every outdoor vendor is using a slightly different form of measurement or a source of the data for that very fundamental piece, which is actually that reach number, that audience number. What is the many, right? What is that impression multiplier? How are they arriving at that? Is this, truly something that is a responsible number that's being used? Is this audited in the way that, press and publishers of that nature have been audited, by, historically. So I think this is something which I think as we work and as we talk more and have these things with, partners like Hivestack and all, this is where I think collectively we need to kind of bring this a little bit more to light, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we find. Like, you can be omni-channel, but if you're not even having a single, currency across that fundamental, who is my audience and how many of them are there, I think that's really the big challenge that I see.
All good panels, you should encourage a bit of healthy debate. So a bit of healthy debate. In the UK, for example, the way that you measure the entire TV audience of the UK is 8,000 people have got a box in their living room that they're meant to press when they're watching a program. In Malaysia, for example, or Singapore, we could access in a day 5 million handset pieces of data and journeys past the panel. So I think that there has to be a fairness of comparison. It's just because Barb or whatever the measurement currency of TV and radio has been for years, has become the gold standard. It's just been accepted because that for years has been there. So I do take that on board, and you're right. A unified, verified, third-party audience tracking is required for sure in most places. But I do think that using some of the mobile ID solutions that are out there already, you can scale so much data into a platform that has not had that level of data before. It's already 100 times better than it was before.
Mm-hmm. Yep, no, and I think it is true. There are solutions out there, but no one really is using or understands very clearly the methodology. And there's still a lot of outdoor vendors that are still relying on, kind of counting literally the number of people that come past their unit, turning on cameras and recording the number of cars that go by. They're all valid in a way, in their own way. But I think when you talk about really the challenges when you're actually looking at a single currency across a region, this is something which I think could stand to actually improve or just the knowledge of how you can secure this information and what you should be as either a marketer or an agency be kind of, sure of or confident of using kind of that number as the reach number or that goal or that impression number, I think is something that we all could stand to talk more about.
Yep, agreed. Because every partner that you speak to, broadly everyone would speak about their own methodology and conceptually everything sounds similar. But in terms of how they're collecting their data and building the impression multiplier, no one knows what really goes behind. And eventually, the robustness of measurement is just behind, build on that data that everyone's collecting kind of separately.
Yeah, that's fair. And look, I think the measurement in the old days was let's stick up 2,000 posters and some people will see them. So we've moved on a bit. I think what we tend to do, and the basis of an impression multiplier is if there are, to your point, just counting people past a poster, which is a good proxy for how many people have opportunities to see. What the mobile ID does is it breaks that down into day parts on a minute-by-minute basis. So it effectively will give you where the highest volumes and indexes of audiences are. So actually, it's still a justified and very, it's a really solid metric that we haven't had ordinarily. And the example I give to buyers is $20,000 in the old days might have got you 20 digital screens for 2 weeks. And those screens would just have the same ads scrolling around on the assumption that exactly the same people are walking past them or driving past at all times. In a programmatic world, that $20,000 might be able to spread your message to 400 different screens because there are certain times a day when that is the right message to play. The obvious examples, of course, are breakfast for McDonald's, but you can also now put real-time data feeds in so that hay fever remedies can be placed when pollen count gets to high, and that's real-time data activating always-on campaigns. So, I think it certainly takes us to a very new space, and also that mobile ID becomes the glue that binds us, the offline world, to the online world. So once people have been exposed to a campaign and that mobile ID, you can pass those IDs back into an agency if you're planning so that you can do sequential messaging. So your outdoor and your mobile actually line up, linked together by mobile devices, which I think is really cool as a marketer to be able to do that.
No, and I think the power of that is really then you can really achieve that true, conversion, the mystical O2O where everyone is trying to have that handoff. Digital out of home really gives you that opportunity once you're able to actually geofence, you're actually retargeting, you can actually see the effect of that. The actual handoff then is actually documented. You can actually, for the first time, see that, which, you used to, have to use all sorts of other studies. McDonald's, of course, knows how many, McGriddles they sell in the morning, but aside from that, I think this is kind of one of those holy grails of kind of omni-channel. I'm sorry, we're taking over the
It's to facilitate his role. I'm delighted.
But this really, the holy grail of really O2O and really that omni-channel approach is, I think, where digital out of home actually has an opportunity to really play a part in.
Yeah, and because you asked briefly about the omni-channels, it is a really important piece because So many different channels are being traded on a daily basis, and 80% of online, 70% of digital audio around the world is now traded programmatically, and pretty much 2% of out-of-home. So it feels like the out-of-home industry, particularly the media owners, now feel like they've finally been invited to the cool kids party, and this party's been going on for years where money's raining down from above, and suddenly, they're now part of it. And I think we are mirroring fairly closely connected TV, and that ability to switch public video and private video together is really interesting. Like a digital 6-year digital bus stop is the same shape and size as a mobile ad. And an ad in social media is autoplay sound off 5-10 seconds. That's an outdoor ad. So, your creative message actually is really easy to push into a different channel for the first time. And it's a channel which is unskippable, it's unblockable, it's 100% viewable, because you wouldn't build a 250 grand screen behind a tree. So a lot of the challenges that you have with online brand metrics actually aren't a problem with digital out of home, because by its very nature, it has to be public and it's open to all.
So we've gone over a few of the possibilities of out of home, and I really want to have a look at the availability of out of home across APAC. Access to inventory's grown in global markets. It was often seen as kind of closed off, and often people assumed it was a huge brand execution that only a Nike could pull off, only a large-scale company, when in fact we're talking now from a one-to-many, we're talking down to you're speaking to a much smaller, easily addressable audience. And I was just wondering that in this region, what the access is like, whether brands know what access they have, and at what level to digital out of home. Chair?
Sure. So I guess from a statistics perspective, I think just in last year alone in this region, from the number of screens we have access to, it's pretty much almost doubled from the start of the year since the end of the year. You might have the actual stats behind it. So even last year when I was doing planning for Scoot as well, we were seeing the integration pretty much happening in real time, where we're working with Hivestack and planning with some of the partners in the local markets, and integration were kind of happening as we were planning.
Nigel, any thoughts?
Yeah, it's huge. So I started a year and 51 weeks ago. It's my 2-year anniversary this week, and we only had an office in Australia. We've now got people we launched in China, Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand. And supply has come actually quicker in the APAC region than demand. So interestingly, where we found in Europe that demand has led the supply to come on board, actually over here we've got, Malaysia, for example, there's 30 media owners on the SSP with access to 90% of all impressions available to be bought programmatically. So actually, it's the challenge is back to the point about who in an agency client world is responsible for taking hold of this new technology. I think media owners are interested, they're leaning in. Your point at the beginning about sort of COVID days, you're right. It's not ideal working in a channel which is outdoor when everyone's told to stay indoors. But actually, people use that time, I think, to plan for the future. It's hard to change tires on a moving car and all that. So actually a lot of progress was made from an engineering point of view behind the scenes with the piping, with out-of-home businesses readying themselves for what the digital future looks like. And I think 2022 figures are back to 2019 pre-COVID levels already.
Yeah, I was reading that the APAC market for out-of-home is going to be worth 55 billion by 2030, and that's a lot of progress in a very short time. Do you see that in terms of what's available when you're out and about, on what you see in terms of the ads that you are served on a bus stop, on a bus shelter, on a billboard? Does that ring true with you in terms of the possibilities for advertisers over here? Penelope?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it come back. We're seeing definitely a lot of ads come back. And when we look at actually ad inflation rates, because this is fun things that we look at on a day-to-day, we're seeing actually out-of-home inflation there is inflation and that's a reflection of demand again. So it's really bouncing back, and it's one of the channels that throughout most markets in APAC, you're seeing actually an increase. We are projecting an increase in actually the price of out-of-home. And that is not just because I think we're going back into pre-COVID, it's actually above even when we look at comparing it to 2019. So I think the reflection really is also of, people really realizing that there's still a role to play in having multiple channels in a plan, that digital does, it is effective for certain things, but, looking at people still live in real life, they exist in 3D and they still have to go to the store, they still have to do things. And some marketers still need to buy that one unit that's in front of their boss's house that their boss can see that. And the reality of outdoor, and anyone that has actually been planning outdoor for, more than 2 years, knows that, these are some of the concerns which your average brand marketer is looking at. And I think what we need to also kind of, that education piece, again, this is what we come back to, is to come back to how you use it, when you should use it. Are you looking to buy on SOV, which is the kind of old way of looking at it, versus now you're looking at your audiences and how do I reach them in that consumer journey? So. Yeah.
And we need to be really careful that outdoor doesn't fall into the digital trap of targeting left-handed vegans on a Wednesday in a Walmart car park. Can they do it? Yeah, probably. You probably spend $4.70 and nothing would happen to your brand. Outdoor is still a huge broadcast public channel. It's seen by millions of people. So we talk about smarter, not smaller. And a lot of it's a bit of a cliche to say we're one-to-many, not one-to-one. We say we're not a one-to-one, we're one to a highly targeted many. You're always going to get some slippage, right? Because you can't control where people go. But surely you can be a lot more targeted about the way. We don't want clients to suddenly spend significantly less and just do like 6 spots. We just want them to use the budget that they've got available to be much smarter and much more measurable.
We had a great conversation earlier about the funnel and full funnel marketing. And is digital out of home pushing out of home further down that funnel? Are we going from the wide open brand play into the targeting, into the call to action, into the addressability? Chair, is that something that you discuss in your agency?
Ideally, I think that's what we want to talk about, always full funnel. So it's not just about creating that very first exposure or impression with the target audience that we want to reach, but eventually the final action that we want to push them towards as well. So I think we kind of alluded to that earlier in the conversation as well in terms of like sequential messaging. I think a lot of what the IDs avail to us is our ability to build that narrative and storytelling with the consumers that we're, creating telling a story with.
We're definitely seeing that in real life. So, the brand advertisers are still they're still buying thousands of posters like they used to, and they're still buying big digital campaigns where they do scroll around 1 in 6 because that's what they want. And they want to be able to turn up and see their ad scrolling around. But we're definitely seeing 2 different things, actually. One, we're seeing existing advertisers planning and buying in a different way, in a more accurate and a more measurable way. And then secondly, we're seeing advertisers that never would have thought about doing outdoor before. So B2B ads, for example, and footfall traffic actually being measured via their out-of-home channels. And in the past, that always would have gone straight to last click channels. So, are we right down there with Facebook and Google? Yeah, no, definitely not. But we're certainly, there are now conversations where you do your broadcast element, you buy your big billboards, you buy your 6 sheets, and then there's an element of the budget that's used to be really highly targeted and more defined. And at the moment, it's not an either or, it's a both.
Is that impacting, is the digital side of things impacting the creativity in out of home? Is that something that goes hand in hand? Can people still be programmatic and creative on the fly? Is that something that marries? Penelope.
I think we all laugh because, we're thinking of those left-handed vegans or, the car ads which think that you will only buy a car on a rainy day if there's a rainy background, I think those were the early days, like 15 years ago, programmatic. Those were the first few demo and, when people were trying to sell in like dynamic targeting. So I think the potential is there. There is potential. And the marketers who have already been experimenting and doing that kind of from a very fundamental last 3 steps, last 3 clicks kind of principle, where they're using, that out-of-home unit the same way they would, to drive those last 3 steps. McDonald's does it very well. 50 meters away, turn left. And, each bus stop that is in that proximity is able to do that. So, like that kind of idea of, just taking that step further and being a bit more disruptive in creativity is where I think there will be that opportunity to actually engage. Because the nice thing as we also, see digital out of home also mature in its measurement, will be, an element of that sentiment analysis, an element of being able to understand, it's not just that, there's number of people actually, or the number of impressions you're registering, but whether people are actually engaging with the ad unit, whether people are, starting to understand and enjoy that. So I think there is an element of that which is possible. Are we seeing it? I would say there are some brands who do it very well, and they have always been doing it very well. So it's not because of the medium being available. I would say first they have to look at whether, fundamentally are they looking at what the roles for comms that they're actually trying to achieve, and if they're creative brands to begin with. And, the medium is only enabling that creativity.
Media and creative never really meet much anymore. So the question of is it used better? I'd say probably not. Could it be? Absolutely. And I think examples. My phone is ringing, which is really off-putting because my bottom is vibrating currently. There are. If you wanted to buy a billboard campaign back in the day, you would have had to have planned it probably 3 months in advance. You'd have had to approve the copy a month in advance. You'd have had to send the copy to a printer. It would have cost you £10,000 to print the billboards. You'd have had to send them to a depot. Then after they get driven around the world in vans and men and women up ladders, sticking them onto billboards. You could have 50 bits of copy now, all created in a day, that are loaded in. You could have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday copy. You could rotate it around. And clearly you can have smart creative that flips around data. You can change copy according to traffic speed past a billboard. And creatives don't always get outdoor right, but so you really don't want more than sort of 10 to 15 words in your strapline. You can have 30 words in the strapline when rush hour traffic in Singapore hits 10 miles an hour or less. That is a really cool use case of using data and technology to action creative in a different way. It's not being used enough, which is probably why we all smile, because we're not as involved in the creative process we would probably like. But we are seeing signs when people do use external triggers and dynamic content, dynamic media optimization, we are seeing quite clever utilization of creative messaging.
Chair, are you seeing any questions around that from clients on terms of the creativity side and the possibilities?
Not much.
Fair enough.
I feel like often agencies are trying to push that particular frontier in terms of getting clients to think more along that space. I think what we just need to be careful and watch out about is potentially being lazy around thinking about creatives when it comes to digital out of home, just because it's, I guess, easy to manipulate or like just, use an adaptation of a creative that we might be using on a different medium. I think we need to think more around whatever you were talking about in terms of really taking into like the contextual signals around as well, and integrating that within our creative thinking.
It's table stakes, isn't it? For your online planning, mobile planning, you'd have multiple pieces of copy. You would optimize. You'd check to see what had the highest engagement rates, and you'd pump more. There's no reason why that practice shouldn't happen in out of home, because the technology is exactly the same, and it is. As I say, it's table stakes in online and mobile. It should be in digital out of home.
We are running out of time. I just want to wrap up with a last question about digital out of home and ESG and the sustainability aspect of out of home advertising. Is that something that is coming across your desks on a day-to-day basis? Do clients have questions? And how is the industry dealing with the potential impact of the digital out of home advertising? Penelope, what do you think?
Yes, actually. So this is in kind of the shadow of the merge that just happened. I think definitely one of the trending topics is sustainability. I think this is, on the backs of kind of, for media, there is now the media sustainability carbon calculators. And I think outdoor has been one which at least has been a lot more obvious in clients being able to wrap their minds around what can be more sustainable or less sustainable. Because, you have, the traditional vinyl, giant billboards that are printed and then trucks driving around, mounting them versus, the active choices you can make to, like purchase, whether it's LED billboards or just at least being, kind of a bit more rigorous about understanding that. Is that something which is actually coming down to how they plan, that I think is what we have yet to see really across APAC. So I think the sentiment is there, the desire to start to think about these things and so start to ask the questions is there. But are we seeing that in every market here? Not quite yet. And I think a lot of marketers also want to understand a little bit better where they can ask these questions, or what are the questions they should be asking their media vendors, or even the partners like programmatic partners. What is the carbon impact? How are you saving data? How are you storing data? Or are you storing so much of it that there is a carbon impact? So I think in APAC, it's early days. But definitely something which we see, a lot more marketers wanting to put onto the table as a conversation to be had.
Nigel?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, every pitch we do now, every RFP, there's a sustainability question, so nobody's escaping from this space. And I think it's interesting because, I read an article earlier that Piccadilly Circus has 50 million impressions in a year. High electricity costs, fine, but that's a one to many, 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 many eyeballs. And on a cost per person basis, in the UK, for example, where I'm housed, I'm global role, there's 30,000 digital screens, and there's 100 million digital devices, right? So most households now have got multiple iPads, or babysitters, as I like to call it, televisions, PCs, mobile phones that all require charging for everybody in that house. And that's a one-to-one. So the cost of that versus a billboard which sees 10,000, 20,000 impressions in a day is a lot lower. And out-of-home is it's like a platform for good. 50% of out-of-home profits across the world goes back into local communities. The reason we have safe shelters the side of the roads for buses that are illuminated and lit is because of out-of-home. The reason we have sustainable street furniture, lighting, benches, public Wi-Fi, public phone devices, all generated by the revenue created by the out-of-home channel put in. So I think out-of-home, I'm not a media owner, I don't own the screens, but I feel like we're in a really safe space here because of, but does it mean we've got all the answers? No. And I think, renewable resources, we're not printing tons and tons of paper posters which are then thrown in landfill. We don't have hundreds of thousands of vans anymore driving around the country, posting billboards. It's a device to device. So digital out of home, programmatic out of home actually puts out of home in a better space than traditional outdoor did.
Chair, any final thoughts on the ESG aspect?
On this topic, clients are definitely thinking more about that, but I still feel like they're on two separate tracks right now. They're not necessarily entering into programmatic out-of-home or digital out-of-home thinking about ESG necessarily. I think it's, still, a topic that will catch on, or like a positive buy effect.
Cool. Well, that's all we have time for, but thanks very much for that, guys. That was a real pleasure, and thank you all for listening. Cheers.
Thanks, John.